Ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of the week again. You are listening to Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. This is ATACS, episode number 34. I am your host, Paul from Atlanta, and joining me today for to talk about all of these awesome video games. First up, we have Mr. Will from Greenville, North Carolina. Hello, Will.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
I'm delectable.
Okay. That's certainly a word you can use. I don't know that I have any way to verify that, but that's perfectly fine. And we also have joining us Mr. Ryan from New York, New York. Hello, Ryan.
Hello.
How are you up in New York? Did you get 27 inches of snow?
I was going to say I'm enjoying what seems to be a touch of spring. We did have our third snowstorm in almost consecutive Wednesdays.
Wow.
And the city slowed down a little bit. I mean, New York, and we didn't have it as bad as other places, but something about the snowstorms kind of makes me not feel good. I got kind of sick after the second one.
Yeah, I mean that's always, especially when you have those warm temperatures. That's never good for your sinuses to go from to go from hot to cold, and then to snow, and then probably back to being somewhat warm again. Hopefully you feel better soon.
Thank you.
But since you are sick, let's just go ahead and just power through this, and then you can take some NyQuil and go back to bed. What have you been playing, Ryan?
Well, a couple of games. It's been a little busier for me lately, so I don't have a ton to talk about. I guess one of the big things, obviously there's Monster Hunter, that'll be, but the Vermintide 2 train has kind of picked up in the past couple weeks.
Tell me about that Vermintide 2. I've been hearing a lot of good things.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways I feel like it's sort of an incremental sequel, in that, they didn't really shake the foundations or do things completely differently. But that's a game that probably in its first iteration, it really just needed some polish and maybe some fixes. And, that's kind of what they've done. There's still some things, I think, there's still some kind of nitpicks and some issues I have. Some things I feel like they probably should have gotten right. There are some bugs in the current version of the game, and considering that it's kind of incremental. But what they have done that's good is they still have a lot of the core combat that was really solid in the first game. And then they've added a lot of new enemy types, excuse me, which is pretty cool because now you have enemies with shields. You have these, in addition to the Skaven or the Ratmen, you also have these Chaos Warriors who tend to be bigger and beefier, so that kind of creates a new dynamic. And, if you're fighting a horde of Ratmen, they're probably even squishier than ever.
Gotcha.
So, certain types of weapons, you'll just mow through those guys. But then, if they send a wave of, I guess, Southerners or Southmen or Northmen or whatever they call them,
one of those cardinal directions.
Northmen, I think, is what they call them. Basically, these Chaos Warriors, you'll find that those things that'll melt the Ratmen sometimes will still take a couple hits on these new guys. And then they have a lot more specials. They have a guy who can teleport in and kind of grab you. They have a guy with a flamethrower, which will push you back and Drain your stamina. They've added
By the way, I think the guy who can just show up and snag you, I think he's a little stupid. Just because all the other ones, you get a sound. You know,
Right.
it'll be like, all right, there's a hunter around or something like that. This big fatty will just show up with a staff, and all of a sudden you can't move, and you're like, okay. And I think it just kind of breaks a little bit with the way they've always done the specials. But it's not like a deal breaker, but I'm like, this guy.
What is this guy?
Right.
Yeah.
So you guys are both playing this on PC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Because I'm wondering, Ryan, you were talking about bugs a little bit. Do you know if that's just the PC version, or if the other versions of the game are having similar issues?
I don't think they've done their console releases yet.
Okay,
I'm not 100% sure of that. They do have console ports of their first game, but I don't know if they've. I think it was a later edition, and I think they're kind of doing the same thing here.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it may be a good time. So talking about bugs, so another thing they've added, I'll segue a bit, but I wanted to talk about another thing that they've done that's kind of cool is they've made some fixes to the loot system. I'm not going to go into details there. I think it's much improved. Like if you open a box or get random loot, it will be for the character you're currently playing, which is just a massive improvement.
That's good.
There's still that randomness to it, which, a lot of these games employ, but at least now you can say, okay, well, here's who I play. Don't give me random loot that can be for any character. Give it to me for the character I'm currently playing.
Right.
That's a huge improvement. But they've also added these kind of hero careers. So they still have the same cast of the 5 original heroes, but each of them, and there's a leveling system. But each of these heroes now has 3 different careers, which kind of represent different potential play styles. So the guy who I've been playing, Marcus Kruber, his mercenary career is sort of more of a damage play style, and he has this passive effect where if you hit 3 enemies at once, you get like an attack speed buff.
Okay.
And he uses a lot of two-handed weapons, so that can be kind of good. Like when you're dealing with these hordes, you kind of stab or slash through like 3 different guys, and then suddenly your attack speed is improved. And then they kind of augment that with talents. So as you level up, you gain access to more talents. And so, for example, one of my talent choices might be something like, when I get that attack speed buff, my nearby teammates also get that attack speed buff.
Okay.
Or alternatively, maybe I have one that means that just gives me like more passive benefit or like better blocking or something like that. So the game gives you some of these like interesting choices, and each of the hero careers also has a special power. So you kind of have now a new tool in your tool belt.
Okay.
So they've added a lot of smart things that make the progression layer. Because the first game had a progression layer, but I think there was just a ton of frustration with like working towards these gear bounties and just randomly rolling. You finish a tough mission, you get a random roll, you get a really great item. It's for a character you never play.
Right.
And that was kind of a consistent theme. It's not perfect. Like if you fail a mission, you get no loot. Like no matter how far you are, you get some experience, but no loot. Like I said, there are bugs. Like the character I'm playing, like one of his weapons is called an executioner's sword, and I was reading on Reddit where people were saying, like there's a swing pattern that just doesn't hit things.
Really? And
there's like a talent for that character that doesn't benefit your allies like it's supposed to. So stuff like that, I feel like, I guess this developer is maybe kind of scrappy, but that kind of stuff is just, it's a little tough to forgive. Like when you have these core aspects of the game that just are a little broken.
Yeah, and I think that, I guess for people out there, and I don't know how many there are, but I had read some stuff online where people were, saying, well, if you're intimidated by, how long the name is here or the history of lore, you know what I mean? Because, when people say like Warhammer, a lot of times that there's like this, 20 years or, of like lore.
Yeah, like a weight to it almost.
But really, you don't need to know, any of that. I mean, really, it's just sort of, it's like Left 4 Dead, but you're playing with different character classes who have different roles. So it's really, I mean, it's got all of the moments that you kind of like about that game in terms of the intensity, you know, and the kind of scrappy elements there where you finally find a healing item and you're like, oh my gosh, thank God, you know.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, you've got these sort of individual roles and you've got a leveling system alongside it. So anyway, I don't mean to jump into Ryan's discussion, but I just thought I'd clarify a couple things.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad you kind of stepped back from it. That's about all I had to say. In addition to what you said too, like they have really satisfying melee combat. Like first person melee combat tends to be clunky in most games, and I think Vermintide has a pretty solid system of that overall. So that's another, I guess, prop to the developer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
my take on Vermintide too.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Will kind of, because I've been playing with Will. So, did you want to add anything from your own perspective, Will, or maybe save it for your segment?
Oh no, I mean you kind of covered it really. I mean, like you said, it's kind of incremental. There's some, you know, it's almost like the first game. The loot system was so messed up that. Yeah. It was almost unsalvageable, and they tried to kind of put something in to salvage it, but it actually weakened these other elements. So, so it really doesn't matter, I guess, to talk about now, but it is one of these things where it definitely took them an iteration to kind of get it right. You know, the situation before was you were incentivized to get these certain items, and that's one of the challenges in Vermintide is you can pick up what they call tomes or grimoires, and those tomes will take the place of your healing item. So it doesn't mean that you can't heal, but it does mean that you're never going to have a backup healing item on you if you're carrying around the tome. Right. The grimoire, if you pick it up, it actually reduces the maximum health of everybody in your party. But both of these items actually increase the chances of you getting a good roll at the end of the game or at the end of the map. So the thing was, like, that was kind of this sort of built-in incentive to go for that and to challenge yourself. But then the fact that you're not getting weapons for your class, and sometimes you're getting white weapons, and there's a lot of randomness in the roll. When they actually put in this bounty board, it actually was a much better way of getting any type of loot you wanted. So then it kind of disincentivizes you to actually use the tombs and the grimoires. And so it kind of broke the system that they created in the first place. And so it really, like, this is all moot at this point, but it took them a second to get that whole thing sorted out. You know?
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, it definitely sounds like that they've, you know, like Ryan was saying, this sounds like more of an evolution than a revolution, and it sounds like they've done a bit better with their second go at it, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, you said you've been playing some other stuff, Ryan. Other than Vermintide, is it time for us to enter into the Monster Hunter block, or did you have something else that you wanted to touch on before then?
Yeah, let's do the Monster Hunter block.
All right, Monster Hunter time.
Hopefully, this won't take too long. So yeah, let's see here.
They put a new monster in the game that's really big and scary. I saw that on Twitter, but that's about all.
I was going to talk about him. I guess kind of like. We hit a bit of a pause. I think, Flex has been pretty busy, so we kind of slowed down for a bit. But then he was able to find some time, and he and I kind of progressed the main quest in order to far enough to where we actually were able to kind of. I don't know if we mentioned it last time, but we were like looking at killing some elder dragons, some kind of like late game monsters, and then. We actually beat, I guess, what's kind of the final boss or the final main quest of the game. So he and I were able to kind of round some of that out, which was pretty cool. And also, like you mentioned, so that kind of has opened up almost all of the loot in the game and almost all of the monsters to hunt. And then they also added, I think it was Thursday, so not that long ago, they added this new monster, and he's actually pretty tough. The first time I kind of ran into him, he actually carded me twice with a slightly weaker armor set, so I kind of went back and tuned up my armor a little bit, and then had my vengeance. But yeah, that's been a pretty cool thing. Like, not only us doing some of those tougher hunts, and these elder dragons tend to be more interesting. Like, they can be more threatening. They have some more mechanics. And also, as you beat them, you kind of open up new armor sets. So one thing that I've been doing over the past few days is kind of looking at, what are some weapons and armor I might want to build. Or you can kind of create builds in that game based around like different combinations of armor. So now that I've unlocked nearly everything in the game, I have a pretty good sense of like, what all the armor is, and I can start thinking about, okay, well, for my greatsword, maybe I'll want to have a build where I can quickly put it away, which lets me run faster, and then I get a bonus whenever I draw, whenever I do an attack, I guess, from having it sheathed.
Okay.
So, they have these different mechanics, like, and these different play styles. Like, for example, one armor set I'm looking at that I think will be kind of cool is to build some like monster knockout, build around like knocking out monsters and breaking off their parts. So there are these different skills that, like, certain types of damage, if you hit the monster in the head, you can kind of cause them to fall over and be vulnerable for a little bit. So there's a skill that kind of pumps that up. But, in investing in that, I might be taking away from good armor options, which would let me, maybe have more attack or more critical hit or more elemental damage, or, so you kind of have to make a bunch of trade-offs in the way that you build things. So I've been kind of fiddling with, the different armor combinations and some of the high-end weapons that I'm kind of interested in.
Okay.
And then I guess the next step is, it seems like they do have like some extra tough versions of the monsters you've already hunted. So that's something that maybe Flex and I, once he gets settled in, we'll hopefully be able to team up and try together.
And what's your hour count to right now?
I am right around 100.
Okay.
Give or take a touch.
So do you feel like that you're kind of just now getting into like some of the post game meat, or do you think that you're getting closer to the end of your time with Monster Hunter?
I'd say maybe a little bit of both. There was definitely, and we definitely hit some plateaus. We probably over prepped a bit. I did, especially because I was trying to give Flex and Nate a little more time. So I would spend time just farming parts and hunting monsters just to not get like way out in front of them in terms of the main quests. But what I'd like to do now, is I'd like to I've kind of narrowed down like a handful of armor sets. Like, I think I'll enjoy hunting monsters to get most of that stuff, maybe all of it, depending on how some of the hunts and loot drops work. And then, like I said, there are these tougher versions of monsters that I think could be exciting, especially with that top tier gear, top tier monsters. Maybe do some team hunts. But I don't think I'm going to go like completely bananas on it. I've already played a lot, and if I feel like the gear cycle is starting to peter out, or if I'm still enjoying the hunts, which is why I'm still kind of excited to play it. But I don't see myself like, there's like a system of augments and a system of decorations, and there are a lot of achievements that you get from doing like, 100 different quests or whatever and stuff like that. I'm, not sure. I probably won't go after, but in terms of like, now that I see all the top tier content, and maybe in some cases I only need a few pieces to make this piece of armor and that piece of armor, like, I kind of see myself like kind of rounding out some item sets and then maybe doing some of the tougher hunts.
Okay. Well, that sounds That sounds like you've definitely gotten your $60 worth out of that game, which is always good. So
yeah, it's a really good game. It's a pleasant surprise for me for 2018.
All right. Yeah, I don't know how many. I mean, I'm sure that there were a lot of like Monster Hunter fans who they were very excited about that game, but honestly, it was not on my radar. And now that it's come out and got a lot of positive reception, that's really good for them. I think this is the first console version of a Monster Hunter game. The rest of them have been on handhelds, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so good on them for migrating to something new and then actually executing it well. So
yeah, and I've heard it's like outsold all their other games, like period.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to think about because I know that one of the Monster Hunters that came out for 3DS, I think basically every person in Japan bought one. So the fact that it's gotten that many more sales out in the West says that they're definitely doing something right. Which I'm a little sad I didn't get on that train, but that's okay. There will always be time to hunt monsters later. You got anything else that you want to touch on?
That's the big stuff. I guess I'm ready to hand it off.
All right. So I've been doing not a ton of stuff really that I haven't already been talking about, but I am very close to the end of my second playthrough of Final Fantasy 15. I have 2 more things left that I want to do, which is the very last secret dungeon, and I'm about halfway through that dungeon as of the time that you're hearing this, and I probably have about another 30 minutes left there, and then there's a giant adamantoise that is the size of a mountain, a literal mountain. I'm going to go punch him, and then I will be calling it done with Final Fantasy 15. I was a little... I didn't read a whole lot about what the secret dungeons were. They were just, I just knew that they existed. And then once I got in there, it's not really a dungeon. It's just a whole bunch of like floors that you just kind of. It's like a room and then a staircase down, and then another room and a staircase down. So it's more just like nothing but combat encounters. So, and then I went and did a little reading, and that's kind of what these are. They're called like raid dungeons, and there's no puzzles. There's not even really any dungeon design. There's only like two aesthetics. You either get like cave hewn stone, or you get the just like underground bunker kind of look. And so there's really not much there as far as content. But there's the enemies are the toughest in the game, and the loot is the best in the game. And the final dungeon has a little twist of you can't use any items, which that game is very item heavy. So not being able to use items while you're going down 60 floors of level 90 something enemies, that gets a little tough. You have to change up your playstyle quite a bit, which I've been doing that.
Yeah, I feel like one thing that I did find with Final Fantasy 15, which I enjoyed my time with it, but I remember the dungeon system was kind of weird because I think they penalize your health over the course of a lot of dungeons, but I felt like you could kind of spam items and offset a lot of that penalty. Like basically anytime you had access to a potion, you could basically like not die.
Yeah. And the game is pretty generous about that. You can get to 0 health, and then you can still walk around and use a Phoenix down or something like that. And what you touched on really is right. Like in the dungeons, whenever you get hit, even if it's just like not really enough to do too much damage, it reduces your maximum health. So as you're going down, when you can't use items, you can't restore your health back up to max. So you don't it's not only just being careful about not dying, you also don't want to get hit, because every time you get hit, that's going to reduce your max health a little bit, which makes could potentially make the next encounter harder. So yeah.
Are all the secret dungeons that you're doing in the original game, or were any of them as part of the content that was patched in?
No, these were all part of the original game. I don't think any of them were patched in.
And I don't know if we've ever talked about it on ATACS, but I remember reading an article about, it may not have been the secret dungeons, but how, like, I think one of the game's dungeons was designed partly by a guy who did environmental design for Dark Souls and kind of had some really interesting storytelling stuff going on.
Yeah, we talked about that on ATACS a little bit. That's the Pitios Ruins.
Okay.
That's completely different from anything else in the game. There are no enemies. The entire dungeon is nothing but puzzles and very difficult platforming. And Final Fantasy 15 is not a platformer. Your characters do not have the tight control that you really need. So there are bits of that dungeon that are absolutely infuriating because it requires a precision that you don't really feel that you have a lot of the times.
Okay.
And yes, it does tell a really cool story. There's some Reddit threads out there for anyone that wants to Google it. It's basically the lore of what they were going to make Final Fantasy Versus 13. Which that's where that game kind of came from. So there's a lot of lore there that isn't really considered part of the canon story of the main game, but it's a really great environmental set piece. And that was one of the Dark Souls dungeon creators, I think, that did that. And you can definitely see the difference in the design styles. There's a lot of vertical level design there that's not really present anywhere else in the game, and it's pretty cool to see. Just don't expect to have a ton of fun with it. So
might be more interesting to read about. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was related to like the vault dungeons or the raid dungeons or whatever.
No, the raid dungeons are just like combat encounter after combat encounter. There's really nothing else there. If you haven't checked out the Reddit thread or some of the YouTube videos for the Pitios dungeon, it's really cool. It's a really cool thing to see. It's like, this is where this stuff came from, even though none of it's made it into the real game kind of. So I'm just about done wrapping that up. Like I say, probably after we get done recording this, I'm going to go sit on the couch and finish that out just in time for Ni no Kuni 2 to come out, which I'll be starting soon, I'm sure. The other thing I've been picking up and playing a little bit recently is Persona 4 again. Just kind of going back and fiddling with that on a New Game Plus, seeing. I mean, really, it's just, I had the Vita sitting around and I was traveling for work, and I said, I'll just grab this and take it with me. And, so I'm not really planning on sitting down and putting another, 80 hours into it, but, just that game is really good. And I'm constantly surprised whenever I go back to it, like how many things that game does right. So I don't really think it's lost its shine even after playing Persona 5. I think Persona 4 is still a great game, and if you haven't played it, you should look into it. So I'm just been doing that a little bit. I think I'm about maybe 3 hours in, but I've been skipping a lot of the cinematics, so I'm a lot further in the game than I would be otherwise. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I've been doing recently. The other stuff I've kind of picked up, I don't really have a whole lot to say about. I'm still playing some PUBG. Age of Empires 2 is still a very good game, and Stardew Valley is still fun to kind of chill to, but I don't really have too many interesting things to say about those. So I think I'll just hold it there. So Will, what's been going on your side of the house?
My side of the house.
Your side of the house, yeah.
Well, I will say that the room my computer is in seems to get hotter when it's hot outside and colder when it's cold outside.
Okay.
It's almost like it's not attached to the house, which is really good for my escapism.
Okay, all right, that's good.
I'm kidding. Well, so let's see. Things I've been playing. I went through a minute ago and kind of wrote down the things that I thought were most interesting. One is a game called Headliner that I played. Very short game, like 45 minutes, but it's got it's really ambitious.
Okay.
It's basically, I guess the idea is that you are the head of a news organization, The game consists of like 7 days. Every day you go in and you're given, and really you're just given all these articles that some of them are letters to the editor, some of them are written by different people on your staff, and you basically choose which ones you want to publish. Okay. And the game really kind of presents a really cynical world where basically you're trying to get this promotion, but you won't get this promotion unless you get a lot of readers. And the only way to get a lot of readers is to have a very heavy slant in this world. So but there's no appetite for even news that attempts to be unbiased in this particular world. No. And not only that, but the implications of the things you published are kind of outsized. So, you publish an article where you basically are saying you shouldn't discriminate against these people. And then everybody is like, oh, so you're pro those people and anti other people, And so it's almost a situation where it's like, you're like, I fell down on the sidewalk and hurt my knee. And they're like, oh, so now you're anti-sidewalk, huh? So they're like,
well, this sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it kind of was. And also, your family, you have this wife, or I guess husband, depending on who you decide to play as, who's got a sickness. So she needs a certain amount of health care. And you have a daughter who's trying to go off to college. And so there's some expenses there. So that, of course, puts the cramp on you, because you're like, well, man, I need to make as much money and get this promotion, but I don't want to sacrifice my integrity. So this all creates this like silly no-win situation that I thought was kind of dumb at first. But I think that there is merit in the game, and I think it succeeds on one front, and that front basically being what would it be like to run a news organization with like the dumbest and most reactive populace that there is, which could be, who knows, maybe that's the real world, Yeah. But like the way that they react to the things that you kind of say, and how much influence you seem to have over their lives, like the game really like turns it up. And so in some ways I found it kind of, instructional, like, okay. Man, I never knew it would be so hard to avoid upsetting people, even with language that to me seems carefully crafted, because I attempted, of course, to try and be as unbiased as possible.
Right.
And the game sort of makes that a little bit impossible for you. Or at least it makes the effects, a little bit more exaggerated than what you'd hope. But that was an interesting thing, even though it wasn't great by any means, I thought it was definitely interesting,
When was the game released?
Headliner? I think it was, at least on Steam, it was a 2017 release.
Okay.
It could have been earlier on, I don't know, it could have been earlier on. I don't know if it's on mobile or on a different platform or anything. But, so that was kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that one.
Yeah, do you? It sounds to me like it's kind of a commentary. Do you get that sense?
I think it's trying to go there. I don't think it succeeds on that front. Not to say it's unsuccessful altogether, but yeah, it's trying to kind of go for that, to sort of show like, I don't know, like I guess. That there's no winning when it comes to media or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. And like the thing that I'm kind of wondering is, so you're trying to like the game's putting you in a position, it sounds like, to where if you try to just like be a good person, it's going to penalize you for it. So you have to like sort of take this stance where, how much of your integrity are you willing to sacrifice? And I get that from a, that can make for some like interesting conflicts, but from what you're saying, it almost sounds like the game is balanced a little too far in the way of you not being able to really do anything. Is that right? Is that true?
Yeah. And there's a lot of these games, like, I mean, in some ways Papers, Please kind of presents this sort of dilemma. there's another game called Beholder that I played a while ago. That was sort of a Beholder, yeah. And it was I don't know if I mentioned that on here or not, but one of the things about that one was, it was almost like to actually have enough money to do any of the things that you want to do for your family, you have to immediately start blackmailing people. Like, and so it's sort of, to me, it's sort of this really kind of, just some of these games, like in their aspiration to create like thoughtful social commentary, they kind of go overboard and create these like hyper cynical worlds, where it's like you just can't exist in these worlds and be a good person. And sometimes I find them thoughtful, other times I find them just kind of like irritating and nihilistic, I guess,
Yeah, and I don't know, and this is totally just me. This is just Paul's thing, but like I've seen a little too much cynicism in the world recently that I don't want anything to do with those games right now. I do not want to watch gritty reboot Batman. I want to watch 1960s Batman right now.
Right. And,
yeah. So like, you good on you for being able to get in there and take one for the team, because there's probably not anything that I could really do with that kind of a genre at this particular moment.
Right. Well, I like to try things that are experimental and try to do a little something different. Which I guess kind of leads me to the next game that I was going to mention, a game called Get Even.
Okay.
So
this sounds positive and fun already.
There you go. So this thing also came out last year. It got a little more, it certainly got more publicity than Headliner, but I don't know that it like really made a huge splash. The premise, I guess, is sort of when you start the game, you find that you are playing through, you're using a device that's called Pandora to play through these memories. And there's a man who's sort of observing you play through these memories, who's trying to get the actual details on a certain situation that happened. And so this is kind of interesting in some ways because this idea that whenever you remember something, you can kind of change it slightly, or you do kind of change it slightly. I mean, I think to get the most unsophisticated take on this concept, if you think about that, if anyone has ever seen that movie Inside Out, the cartoon, there's a part where sadness touches the memory. Like there are these little balls that represent memories in that movie, and sadness will touch them and it'll kind of tinge it. And so it's almost like taking something from being a happy memory to something that's being kind of bittersweet, but in the game, that's a liability, that you'll change these memories. And you actually kind of have a motive to keep your observer from learning everything about what happened. And the memories that you actually don't want him to see, they'll be populated by more of the game's enemies. So it's almost like a built-in, or like a mental defense that's made physical in a sense. So it's a really kind of an interesting concept, and a lot of it is really fantastic. I mean, the production values are almost like AAA production values. The voice acting is really, really good. The story is told with like a lot of care. There's a lot of twists and turns. It's a thriller that kind of kept me playing and kind of on the edge of my seat to kind of see sort of what actually happened. Because basically, at the very beginning of the game, there's a woman that you try and save, who has like this bomb strapped to her, and you don't save her. But apparently you live in some sense, and then from that point on, the person who is sort of observing you has a vested interest in figuring out exactly what happened when you were trying to defuse this bomb and why you were there. And so it's kind of interesting. I don't know that I have too much else to say about it. I just think that it was, I guess I wish it wouldn't have gone so under the radar, because it was doing something really, really clever. But there were certain people in there that were a little baffling to me. Certain characters in the story, their motivation didn't really make much sense to me. But at the same time, it was a cool little thing. I like these sort of games that sort of make psychology, real in some ways, through the gameplay. So I don't know if anyone had heard about that one or had.
No, I'd never even heard about it. I brought up the Steam page while you were talking about it, and I mean, I don't like how like this looks like a AAA game, at least from what I'm seeing here, and I don't remember this at all. Like,
Yeah.
I totally never knew this existed.
It was sneaky. It was a sneaky one. But anyway, some other aspects of it are, so most of what you're doing is actually kind of like a walking simulator, I guess, instead of to get off of the actual, the heady stuff. I mean, so you're walking around with this phone, kind of collecting pictures of evidence, reading these documents that populate these spaces, and kind of piecing together slowly what happened in these different locations. So that's a lot of what you're doing, but there is some shooting aspects to it. And there's something in the game called a corner gun, which is kind of bizarre, but it's this mechanism that you have like a pistol on the end of it. And it sounds ridiculous, but it actually feels kind of neat to use, and it pivots one way or the other. So you can sort of take cover behind a box and then point your gun directly up in the air and then pivot it forward. And then you use this little screen, this little like cell phone screen that actually uses like heat signatures to actually shoot things completely from safety. And of course you can turn it as well as turning it up. You can also turn it like left and right around corners and stuff. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's kind of fun to use.
Hey, that's fine. I mean, as long as it's fun to use, video games don't always have to be tethered to realism.
Certainly.
Awesome.
But yeah, so that was Get Even, and there was one more that I wanted to touch on. I didn't know that we had a surprise guest drop in, so we got to give this man some time to talk about being in the breach.
That's true.
At the same time, I wanted to mention I finished this morning a game that I think some people on the podcast have heard of. It's called Pyre.
I've heard of it. I heard it wasn't very good. Lots of alien basketball. That's
what is that game?
I'm calling in here to the ATACS podcast. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I have a question. Long-time, first-time. I have a question for the panel. Is Pyre a good video game?
I didn't play it.
Yes.
It grew on me.
We did a scientific breakdown called the ATACS Pyre Spoilercast, and the conclusion was yes.
Okay.
Oh, wow. I didn't know there was a spoiler cast for Pyre. I'm going to have to go dig into that.
It's probably on the YouTube
as a longtime fan of the podcast, it was a good one. I enjoyed it a
lot. Great.
Thank you. Thank you, caller.
You didn't find it rambling at all, sir?
Well, as a fan of ATACS, I enjoy listening to you ramble. I've come to expect that.
Right. It wouldn't be the same ATACS if there wasn't a certain degree of rambling.
No.
But so I finished Pyre, and there were a lot of things that were kind of bizarre about it. I guess I don't know if I feel the need to actually like talk about what you do. Basically, I mean, you orchestrate this group of exiles through a contest, and they're all downcast and what's called, I guess, the downside, I believe. Which it'd be weird if I couldn't remember that so soon after playing it. But if they win at certain rights, they are allowed back into what's called the Commonwealth, from which they were exiled. As this reader, basically you're responsible for figuring out where the competitions are held, and also you're responsible for like helping them make decisions and reading this really, really obtuse book called the Book of Rights. And when I first started the game, I started reading that, and I couldn't really, make heads or tails of it. And so I just stopped reading it. And so as I kept playing, I was enjoying myself, but I just stopped caring at all what that book said. And so, it was like
thing.
Every time I looked in my little cart, which is where my whole team convened, that book was always like shining. It's like, read me. get all the great lore that I have. And I was just, I don't think so, man. I think I'm just gonna keep it moving here.
I'm just gonna go play some more basketball. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And the basketball is interesting. At first, I didn't really like it, and I think part of the reason I didn't like it was because it seemed it's kind of alien, even though it does resemble basketball. I mean, and I think I thought that it might be more complex than it actually ended up being. And so it was a little overwhelming, especially because, some of the characters that you're playing with can move extremely fast, both your opponents and your team. So it's very hard sometimes. Like I had this one little dog named Rookie, and I was so concerned about getting him to move fast that by the time I was actually mid game, he was too fast. Like I couldn't even control him enough to get him into the pyre.
That's funny.
So yeah, that was it was just interesting. So like the game gives you all these challenges that you're able to do. Like about halfway through the game, they start giving you these additional constellations that you can activate to make each one of the maps harder.
Yeah.
But I found that actually conflicted a little bit with what I was doing. So part of what you do as this reader is decide which one of your exiles deserves to be reinstated in the Commonwealth. And one of the things about that is that like they have to actually play in a right to be eligible to be reinstated, and also in order to be reinstated, they have to have reached a certain level of enlightenment, which they only reach by playing the rights or the matches. And so I was always self-handicapping because it seemed like a lot of the times the person I wanted to send back was someone I actually didn't like playing with in the game. Yeah. And so I was always having to like handicap myself with these crappy, slow idiots. So
that's something they've done with a lot of Supergiants games. Like with Transistor, if you died, it would like disable temporarily one of your things.
Right.
And I've heard them talk about like trying to find ways to kind of incentivize players to try out different characters or weapons depending on the game, whatever it is. And this was kind of their solution for Pyre. And Mark Brown actually had a video on that was pretty interesting about how Pyre does that. So yeah, it was an interesting take. I could totally see how like if you just really did not want to use some characters, then kind of being forced to try all the characters would not be as fun.
Yeah, there were two occasions especially. One was with the demon character, which I had heard that Flex, you had the same take on the demon character as I did. And the other one is, I guess I won't. We're not spoiling in the spoiler cast, so we'll leave that one where it is. But mostly, I enjoyed the fast characters. There's a character you get called Shay, and her top level upgrade allows her to sprint indefinitely once you actually have the ball or the orb.
Oh, you mean the Moon Touch girl? She was called something different in my game.
Yeah, you can name her anything. So like anything that ends with AE, I think that like Zay, Shay, Bay, all kinds of weird stuff.
Faye was my name.
Gotcha. So I named her Shay, but yeah, she was amazing. Rookie was pretty amazing, and there's also a harpy girl named Pamitha, and Pamitha to me is insanely broken. Like, I mean, there are some enemies that are half okay at dealing with her, but like the flyers, you either have to jump and kick them out of the air, or you have to have a flyer yourself. So every time I had her in, she just dominated the other squad. She just flew over all the enemy's head and dived into the basket. So I had my squad that I definitely liked. But anyway, so that was
who's your A squad?
That was probably my A squad. Shay, Rookie, and Pamitha.
Gotcha.
I think Rookie is on. Not to spoil it for anybody.
Yeah.
But if you play Pyre, you'll probably like Rookie.
Yeah. I mean, now
we all talked about our A teams in the spoiler cast. I think multiple of us liked Rookie.
I mean, the most important thing to really realize about Rookie is just you have to make that decision about his mustache, and it has long-term ramifications for how the game goes.
Yeah, I think I told him And Spoilercast probably has this. I think I told him that it looked distinguished.
Right. Yeah,
I told him
can't say
to save that shit off.
Yeah, I can't say I said the same, and it's really contentious. But regardless of all
we
the
might
other,
have a falling out here.
There were
the end of ATACS.
So I guess the thing about it is, the rights got more fun. I got more interested in kind of the characters and the stories. I guess to me, the thing that I guess is most interesting about the game is I feel like it has implications for kind of how we treat underclasses or the poor in general. I think, and this I'm sure falls in line with my politics a little bit, but basically the idea being, that there are certain kind of, I think, material advantages, or this idea basically, if you play by the rules, you are going to basically be successful, just in a general rule in life. And sometimes I think that we kind of overlook some of the kind of advantages that certain groups of people have in this race, in this attempt to kind of make it fair. And so I don't know. I guess I felt, and maybe a way to put it more eloquently would be that I felt that the things that the scribes or the voice, the outlook that they had towards the different exiles is in some ways very similar to the outlook that middle class and upper class people in the United States kind of have towards poor people. Basically, like, if you need to work hard, you need to play, your opportunity will come, you're gonna get it, just keep plugging away. Not to realize basically this sort of myth when really only a certain number of people can be saved. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, it does have a lot of, like, it does have a surprising amount of that stuff to dig into.
Yeah, I didn't get the same message out of it, but it is a very optimistic game, and it has some interesting themes to explore.
But I think that was one of the things that I thought was kind of most interesting about it, is that you can kind of read it in a lot of ways, and there's a lot to take in it. I mean, there's lore there if you want to dig in.
It's a surprisingly deep game with everything that's going on in it. Like, between the lore and the themes it's playing with, like, there's a lot to dig into in that game.
Yeah, I ended up, I think, reading a bunch of the Book of Rights. That was something we're touching on lore that you said that you basically kind of discarded.
I just pretended I was playing NBA Jam with Pamitha.
There you go.
Yeah, I do agree that I found
she's on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
I found the pacing of that kind of awkward. They wanted to gate you on that, and I think the game's kind of built-in storytelling through character dialogue was really good, and it kind of built the complex layers of the game out really well. But the gating of the Rights book, which had some of the backstory and lore, was, I think, a bit tough. It's like, well, here's a few more pages if you want to read an expedition dump between all the dialogue.
Yeah, when Sandalwood first showed up, he was like, "Hey, man, you would know this stuff if you'd been reading the book." And I was like, "Yeah, my bad. I did."
Well, and to be fair, I mean, by the time, I think at that point of the game, like, you haven't even unlocked half the book. So really, no, you don't know any of that.
That's funny.
Anyway, yeah.
So read those things.
But that's pretty much what I want to talk about. Headliner, Get Even, and Pyre. So
I'm glad you gave it a shot, and hopefully you found it worth playing.
Yeah, I finished it this morning after a pretty big marathon session.
Nice. Good job.
Yeah, I think all of us had a similar reaction of, like, slow start, but got better as it went, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So Mr. ATACS superfan, Mr. Flex,
long time first time,
dialing in a few minutes late, but that's okay. You must have something to talk about, because you took a pause, and you're very busy real life, and said, I have to call in and talk about this thing.
I'm just such a big fan of all your work. I had to hear Will talk about Pyre.
Well, you did miss the Monster Hunter block.
All right, well that's fair enough. I assume Ryan talked about how we saw credits.
I got you back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's monsters and you hunt them. That's pretty much what I got out of it.
Oh,
that's the video game.
That's what it means.
So
Flex, are we going to hunt Devil Joe? When are we hunting Devil Joe?
Let's do it. Whenever I have internet.
Which, actually, you're dialing into the podcast with a series of smoke signals right now.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. But what have you been playing in your time that you've had to play video games?
Yeah, other than Monster Hunter, the only game I've been plugging away at, which I've somehow accrued a lot of time in this, but it's been in like fits and starts, is Into the Breach. I've continued to really, really enjoy Into the Breach and have continued to put some time into it. I have now unlocked all of the squads except for the quote-unquote secret squad. So the way you unlock squads in this game is by getting the achievements. So each squad in the game has 3 achievements tied to them. So it's like performing a certain feat with that squad. And then there are like 20, 25, somewhere in that range, just regular achievements that anyone can get. And they're different like challenge type things. But each achievement you get gets you an in-game coin, and you use those coins to unlock squads. So I've unlocked all the normal squads, and I have beaten the game on normal with all of them, which doing that with the Blitzkrieg squad was quite the challenge because that squad is terrible. I like all of the other squads in the game, but the Blitzkrieg squad is just a nightmare. And yeah, I'm trying to round up the last couple achievements to, if you get every single achievement in the game, you can unlock the quote unquote secret squad. So I only have a couple left to get. And then after that, I want to really dive in and play more on hard mode. We were talking about Into the Breach, and yeah, I really want to. I have beaten hard mode once with the starting squad, which are called the Riftwalkers, and I think they're just a generally good squad because all of them have. Your squads are always 3 mechs, and the Riftwalkers have all of them can both deal damage and push. So that's really handy because a lot of this game is about just pushing and positioning. And some of the squads will do a lot of that, but not a lot of damage. And that can be tricky. But I want to try and beat hard with more of the squads and just been keeping on. And the game's still a whole lot of fun. Like this game has really grabbed me. And I'm kind of surprised that I'm still enjoying it as much as I am this many hours in.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Like some of the stuff you're talking about now, I mean, maybe with a different flavor, but it's some of the stuff I remember liking about FTL. Because, I mean, I guess let's couch this, but I tend to like roguelikes, some exceptions, not every single game, like Spelunky we talked about, but at the same time, they had kind of these layers that kept the game interesting. Like you unlock ships as you play, and some of the conditions are pretty normal. You beat the game, you get a ship. Like you make it to the 4th, you make it halfway through, you get a ship. But then there were these like kind of challenge conditions where you had to kind of play strategically or play to like a certain, to like a certain theme. And then also like, the different ships had different parameters, which could very much influence your gameplay, and like they kept high scores for how well you had done with the ships. And I found myself, it's kind of funny because like, you unlock some ships that seem pretty powerful, but the more and more I played the game, the more and more I felt like the Kestrel, like your very first ship, was actually one of your better ships.
Yeah, I kind of had the same feeling by the end of my time with FTL. I think I put 70 or 80 hours in it, something like that, and I was kind of like you play with some of the other ships that you ostensibly think are better, and you're like, I just kind of miss the Kestrel. I mean,
yeah.
And I get a similar feeling with this as like the starting squad, the Riftwalkers. Like I've played all the other squads now, and it's like, yeah, I think the Riftwalkers are just kind of all around the most solid. Like, it is cool to experiment with the other squads, and I'm sure it was like this with the other ships in FTL, where like they kind of get you to play a different style and think about the game differently, which is neat. But in terms of just raw effectiveness, it's like, yeah, that starting one's just good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and doing all that experimenting, like, it's cool because it gets you to think about the game in different ways, and it's like the core game is still the same, but it's like it's almost like the way you see the game changes as you just get exposed to more variety of situations and abilities you have at your disposal, which is pretty cool to just have the game like constantly evolving like that. And it's a lot of fun to just like play with all of those abilities. And they also let you do a custom squad, so you can pull any 3 mechs across any squad you want. You could even do 3 of the same mech. So you could just take like. So I did one. So one of the squads is called the Frozen Titans, and one of their mechs is this flying thing that shoots like this ice ball at something and will turn it into ice, which is a common mechanic in the game. If something gets turned into ice, it's invincible. If it gets hit, it doesn't take any damage. It just breaks it out of the ice. But as long as it's in the ice, it can't move or attack or anything. It's just immobile. So if you use that on an enemy, you're just like basically taking them out of the fight until something hits them. It's like, all right, I'm not going to deal with you. I'm just going to freeze you. But when this mech shoots that freezing blast, it freezes itself. So there's a little bit of give and take.
Right.
So I did a run with a custom squad because I was going for some specific achievements that I thought this would be helpful for. And I did a custom squad where all 3 of my mechs were those.
Okay.
So you just run them into the middle of the enemies and freeze a big threat and then sit there.
Yeah, so what I would do is, so you can repair yourself, which will get rid of any status effect, including frozen. But that takes a whole turn to do that. But what I was doing is I was very like consciously positioning myself. So it's like, all right, I'll freeze one enemy, but I also position myself in the line of attack of this other enemy. So I will block their shot from hitting a building, and it'll also break me out of the ice. So it's like I'm kind of taking out 2 enemies at once in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then not getting frozen. So like you really start thinking about things like that. And it's just like, and every different squad makeup you play as just gets you to think about things just a little bit differently. And it's like, I feel like the cumulative effect of like playing with all these different combinations just like builds up this wealth of like knowledge and experience like with the game that's pretty satisfying to like go through all that. And it does give the game a lot of legs. Like I'm surprised at how long I've played the game, but like it makes sense with like the robust core design and like all the varied units they have in it that it could last this long.
Okay.
It's a good time. I'm still really digging it.
Yeah. How much time have you been able to put into it?
So according to Steam, grand total, I'm approaching 50 hours.
Okay.
I'm sure a good number of those hours are idle time because being a turn-based game, I kind of leave it up like as I get up and do things.
Sure.
But I've definitely put a lot of time into it for sure.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like this is like one of those games that you can rack up the hours without even really realizing.
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
wonder-
I mean, and you could just spend 5-10 hours, do a couple runs, because one run takes probably on average like 2 or 3 hours. So you could do a couple runs, get your fill, and peace out, or you can really go wild with it.
What is the biggest difference would you say between now? I think when the first XCOM remake came out, that was almost like the new turn-based strategy gold standard. How would you say? In what ways do you feel like this game, or what are the most meaningful ways that this game kind of differs from, I guess, that sort of style or that sort of framework?
Yeah. The biggest difference to me is scale. So all of the battles in this game are on an 8x8 grid, and you see the whole grid, and you control three mechs, and every battle is 4 or 5 turns long. There's always a turn counter in the upper right. So it's a bunch of smaller scale battles, but there's also, it feels like a lot more going on in them. Because generally in XCOM, it's run to cover, shoot things. Not to super, like you have other things. You have Overwatch, you have grenades, like you have other options, but like generally that game is about being very careful in how you move up and positioning and cover and playing things very carefully in a way. This game, it puts you on a smaller grid. You have less turns and less units to worry about, but like every turn you have so many variables to think about. Like the enemies will move in their positioning and like show you where they're going to attack, and then you get to react, and it's like, oh boy, okay, how do I really milk every single option for what it's worth and really optimize this? So it's almost more of a puzzle game in a way, because you get these small
I was going to say that. Yeah.
You get these really small scale grids, and you just have a couple turns, and they like just present you with like, all right, you have a lot of stuff to deal with. How do you use the varied abilities you have to deal with it? And it's really just like puzzling it out.
But it sounds like you kind of know everything you're going to be up against.
Yes.
When the match starts.
Yeah. So you will have, so like when the match starts, there will be a couple enemies on the map. And each turn, new enemies will spawn. So you don't know exactly what new enemies are going to spawn. So there is an unknown factor to that. But what they do, and where you always have the information, is the way it works. So like if you think about an XCOM, like, you know, you've made your moves, and then the enemies make their moves. And when the enemies make their moves, they will move and attack at the same time. And you don't have a way to react during their turn. How Into the Breach works is the enemies will do all their moves, and there are indicators for what they're attacking. And then you take your turn, so you can disrupt all of their attacks. So like, which is actually cool to think about, because like this is like fighting giant bugs in the city, and you're in these giant mechs. So like, if you were to do like a super hot style, like playback in real time, it would basically just look like the bugs constantly trying to attack the city, and then at the last second, your mechs like punch them out of the way. Just like, and the bugs never hit anything.
That's fine.
Because you always get to move. Like they line up their shots, they tell you what they're going to hit, and then you get the chance to intervene, which is a little bit of a different take from most turn-based strategy games like XCOM that I've been used to playing.
Right.
So it's like a different kind of thought process, but it does, like, on your turn, you have more information than you normally do.
And I guess it works the same for you. Like, I mean, you kind of, do you set up where you're going to attack, and then they have a chance to move out of the way, or?
No, your attacks actually pop off immediately.
Oh.
Yeah. No, you definitely have the advantage in these fights.
Okay.
They have the advantage in numbers, but you have, like, the way it's set up, the flow of it is definitely in your favor.
Gotcha.
Because basically how it works is, like, you take your turn. Your turn works as if like XCOM or Fire Emblem or the other things we're used to. But when the enemies go, any attacks they had set up that you didn't stop, those will go off and hit. And then they will move in position for the next attack. So it's kind of like they attack and then move, and then queue up their attack.
I see.
So, I mean, they have a full turn. It's just like the way it's orchestrated, like, allows you to intervene.
It's inverted in a way, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
It's a good time.
And so have you beaten the game?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you beat it on normal and everything?
Yep, yeah, I think you stepped out. I've beaten it on... No, you're good. I've beaten it on normal with every squad. So there are 10 squads in the game if you count random squad and custom squad. So there are like 8 preset squads and then random and custom. I've beaten the game on normal with all 10 of those. And then I've beaten the game on hard once with the Riftwalkers. And one of the things that I want to do going forward is beating the game on hard with more squads.
Okay. It sounds like you're really deep into that right now, which is pretty cool.
I'm pretty deep into it. It's awesome.
He's pretty far into the breach.
Yeah.
We're
We're going to be making puns about this game for the next year.
Oh no.
Yeah. So to get us out of this pun land, what have you been having time for anything else with all the real life stuff going on, or has Into the Breach pretty much consumed you?
Yeah, just Monster Hunter and Into the Breach is all I've been playing.
All right. Well, that's gonna just about wrap us up, I think. But before we sign off, I do kind of want to see what's on everyone's list for the next couple of weeks that they're wanting to get into. So we'll start with you. What have you got on your to play list here for the next couple of weeks?
Well, I'm about an hour or two into a game called Raccoon, which is developed by actually the composer of a lot of popular music. Like I think Laura Shigihara did like Plants vs. Zombies, and she did the music for like To the Moon and stuff.
Okay.
But this is her game. It's like an RPG Maker game, but so far I'm liking it. And then on the co-op front, I'm about maybe a third or a half away through A Way Out, which came out yesterday. But it is so up my alley that I just pretty much got into it immediately.
All right.
And Vermintide 2, still working on that. And working on a game with Ryan called No Heroes Here.
Okay.
But that's kind of what I've been playing.
All right. What about you, Ryan? What do you have coming up?
Vermintide 2 and Monster Hunter.
Okay. That's probably going to mean that next week or the next ATACS, you're probably going to be talking about those two games again. So, I think I might actually try to get into some Monster Hunter. So
yeah, you should do it.
Yeah, I've been pondering about it.
Go hunting with you.
Yeah, gonna go hunting. I might try to get into a little bit of that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. If you and Nate end up, sticking with it, then we can do some late game four-man hunts.
I think Will is also planning on it at some point, so maybe you should coordinate.
Yeah,
coordination.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So, what about you, Flex? What you got coming up?
A lot of real life stuff going on, but when I can, I will be playing, I'm sure, some more Monster Hunter and Into the Breach. I'm a broken record at this point, but still want to play Celeste when I can. And I also want to play A Way Out. I think Nate and I are already on board for that. And Far Cry 5 comes out soon. I'm really curious about that one. So that's kind of the stuff coming up.
Yeah, I think that the other thing, and I don't know whether I'm going to pick it up between now and our next ATACS or not, but Ni no Kuni 2 has come out, and that's gotten some really positive reviews. I really enjoyed the first game. I know Steph did too. So we'll end up picking up Ni no Kuni 2 relatively soon. It might not be in the next couple weeks, but that's definitely on my short list of stuff to pick up and play. Will, you said you wanted to touch on one more thing real quick.
Yeah, so last time we talked for a minute about the whole Tennis Elbow 2013 debacle.
The debacle.
And I had one type of thing that I thought would be kind of uplifting on that front. So a game came out recently on Steam, which is actually sort of like it's sort of a port of a mobile version of a board game, which is kind of a lot to follow. Okay. But have you ever heard of like the Legendary series of games? It's like a deck builder, sort of a deck builder board game. And then they made like an Aliens variant and a Predator variant, and there's a Marvel variant. But it's kind of a cool framework. But there's a fantasy themed version of Legendary that was released on Steam, and I tried it. And there were some gripes I made. One was that certain enemy power wasn't upgraded in real time. Another thing is that there was a free-to-play market that's really kind of tough to figure out.
Yeah.
Really figure out exactly what it's doing. And since I got that refund, I did end up buying it on my phone, and I've been just like playing it, whenever I have downtime because it's a pretty good time. But I found that at least the mobile version, and I can't say anything. There's only been 12 reviews for the Steam version, but one of those was mine, and I've been playing the mobile version, and I recently got an update like 2 days ago, which specifically fixes both of the problems that I mentioned having with the game.
Really?
And so I don't know if I can actually take any credit for it, but seeing as how my review was commented on by the developer, I feel like maybe they took it to heart, and I thought that was a really cool thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Awesome. So they actually kind of made the exact changes. So now when you go into the little free-to-play market, it says nothing. It says specifically like nothing in here changes gameplay. And then when you actually fight against the specific schemes and masterminds that change enemy power, it updates in real time. So I thought that was just a cool little thing.
That is pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah. Good on that dev, really.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
that was
awesome.
all I wanted to mention.
Well, on that very uplifting note, that game developers do listen. That's awesome. We're gonna go ahead and call it. This has been Adults Talking About Cool Stuff, ATACS episode number 34. We will be back in your feeds in 2 weeks for episode 35, and we will see you then. Thanks for listening.